Welcome to the 5511 podcast, inspiring stories of God's power being poured out globally in the lives of ordinary people. Hosted by Dirk Smith, Peyton Armstrong, and Brooke Kell. This podcast is supported by EEM. EEM publishes, prints, and distributes Bibles and Bible-based materials in 30-plus nations and in 20-plus languages, free to all.
Welcome back to 5511 podcast. My name is Peyton Armstrong, and joining me today, as always, is Dirk Smith and Brooke Kell. This morning or afternoon, whenever you're listening, we have a great guest joining us. His name is Scott Hayes. Good morning, Scott. We're so glad for you to join us.
Good morning.
Scott Hayes currently serves as our publishing director and is also our longest serving team member who's worked at EEM for 38 years. After moving to Vienna in 1984, he organized Bible smuggling and was also involved with EEM printing and bookbinding until 1989. From 1989 to 1991, he managed the printing of Bibles. In the fall of 1992, he completed bachelor's degrees in both business and theology. Upon completion, he returned to work for EEM. In 2004, when EEM started outsourcing all printing and binding, Scott became publishing director. Scott strongly believes in EEM's mission to get the word of God to the people of Eastern Europe. Scott has served as an elder and has a special love for teaching the Bible. He enjoys woodworking projects and hiking in the Vienna forest where he lives. He and his wife Sabina have 3 grown children and 1 grandchild. Thank you for joining us, Scott, and we're so excited for you to be with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, man, good to have you with us. Always good to see your smiling face. Looking forward to actually seeing you in person.
It will not be too long.
I know. In May, it's going to be very nice. Very nice. Man, I'm thrilled to have you on because I'm anxious and eager for our audience to get a glimpse into you and just some of the work that you've been involved in. Man, and with as Peyton read your bio, man, she read how many years. I was like, I kind of shook my head. 38 years. Like, man, that's a good long career, brother. Go ahead. What?
I was just going to say EEM's the only company I've ever worked for.
Wow.
Yeah, and how many people? That's amazing in and of itself. You know, this day and age, how many people can say that? I mean, that's really a blessing. Just shows your commitment, which I appreciate. Give our audience, kind of summarize, I guess, the early days. I mean, it was, in the 80s when things started off, and I mean, what did you see? What were the challenges? And, maybe the contrast to today even, but maybe focus right now on some of the early days. What was that like?
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge was the very fact that the Bibles had to be smuggled. It was pretty much illegal, nearly everything we were trying to do, which also meant we didn't have a lot of tight connections with the people in the country. There was secrecy all around. So a lot of times somebody would come in and say, okay, I'll take in 100 Bibles. And it was like, what are you going to do with them? And they would look like, you didn't answer that. You didn't really ask that question, nor do you intend to get an answer, I am assuming. And so it was all, trust, cloak and dagger as far as that is. We had one organization that distributed a lot for us, and they were responsible for picking the Bibles up from us and getting them through the Iron Curtain, basically, and to the next guy. And in all that time, I met one single person from that organization.
Wow.
And I would send him a postcard. I had no phone number. I had no address. I had a P.O. box. And I would say, we need to talk. That was about all I was supposed to say. And then he'd show up at our door and say, okay, what do you need? And we'd discuss it. And then he'd come back later. And it was always him that came to pick things up. And he always came in the vehicle that they were not using. So, it was much different. The numbers were obviously much smaller just because of that.
Man, that had to be fun, though. I mean, in a way, just kind of the this is Christian espionage going on.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. It didn't seem extra challenging at the time because
It's all you knew.
well, no, it was like you hand off the package to a DHL guy and I ask you the question, how exciting was that? And it's like
Yeah.
they're the ones taking the risk. They're the ones praying intensely before they go.
Yeah. Did it seem though in that process? I mean, did you ever think past that? Did you ever find yourself thinking about the book past that and where it was going? And I mean, did you ever hear? I mean, I guess you never heard stories because you didn't really know who the people were.
No,
but
you heard a few stories. And the stories are always the same. As far as God's word does something incredible, you're amazed, you go, wow. And that hasn't changed. It's the same stories we hear today. It's just maybe how they got the Bible is a little bit different. But again, it's still very amazing and incredible sometimes when you hear about all the coincidences of God's orchestration that have to take place before somebody
coincidences. Yeah.
Right.
I'll put my air quotes up there.
Lightly, the coincidences.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. Yeah. And I mean, staff wise, very different. I mean, what was the total staff? I mean, at that time,
it was actually, I was looking at the numbers. I would guess when I was the first few years with EEM, we were doing somewhere around 5% of the volume that we're now doing. And
Wow.
I would not be surprised if it was actually less than 5%, but somewhere in that category, 5% would be like the 100,000. And we had 8 to 10 people working in the printing shop. We had another 4 to 5 people just in the office. And now we're doing with less staff, 20 times the volume.
Yeah.
And before, if we ran the printing machines full on every day, full shift, we would be, depending on what you measure with children's Bibles or whatever, but somewhere around 50 to 100,000 would be a full year's work. That's cool. Now it's 2 weeks later, delivery time. So that has changed dramatically. I compare that to a year or two ago when 9 truckloads of children's Bibles went to Croatia. And it's like, well, we would have greeted that very kindly back then.
That's true. Scott, can you tell us, do you have any brief Bible smuggling related stories that impacted you the most in just the ways that God would reach people in the early days through this ministry?
The one story that was always impressive to me, but I actually don't know the origins of it. Everybody tells the same story type thing. But the guy who's reading his Bible, preacher reading his Bible, traveling through Russia, and he was actually a Russian himself. I mean, he was not from the West. He lived there, and he put his Bible down, went out to go to the restaurant car or the restroom or something, and came back, and he goes, "Where's my Bible?" And the guy goes, "Worthless book. I threw it out the window." And you're thinking, well, that was a bad move. And I think it was either 1 year or 2 years later, he gets a knock on his door, and he had his address written in the Bible. And he's like, "Yes, may I help you?" And they say, "Well, we're not sure if you can help us or not, but we're looking for somebody to baptize us. And we know this Bible at some point belonged to you." And he's like, "What?" "Yeah, we were standing by the train tracks and this book fell at our feet and we started reading it and became believers, and now we want to follow through on that." And you just hear stories like that and it's like, okay. I actually heard a very modern version of that recently. 2 Farsi ladies, or 1 Farsi lady in Iran, they're in the subway and someone had quietly left Bibles in the seat and just gotten up and left. And so they sit down and there's this book there and they pick it up and realize what it is and stick it in the bag and think, I'll read it. And so she read it. She became a believer. Her sister read it. She became a believer. But they're two people like a faith island. They don't know what to do. They don't know anybody. They don't know a church. They don't know where to go. And so they were praying, just, God, what do we do now with this? And one sister woke up and shook her sister a few days later, and she said, I had a dream last night. And she said, okay. And she said, what was the dream about? He goes, no, there was nothing to it. It was just an address. I just have an address. And so, well, let's go knock on the door. So they go to the address. Well, what it was the address of a house church that just happened to be meeting when they knock on the door. But everybody at the house church was there. So when they got the knock on the door, it was like fear time, you know. It was like, who could that be? Who would knock? And so they opened the door, and there's these two ladies standing there, and they go, can we help you? And they're like, we really don't know. And then they shared their story, and they're like, okay, come on in. So God connected them. And for me, that's what it's about, in a sense. It's like, you know, we do our part getting the Bibles to people, but that's not all there is to it. There's so much more. And God is able to orchestrate the whole thing from beginning to end.
Man, amen. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's it. You know, that your first story is very similar to what we call the train story about Ivan Martos, which we told in our first episode about the guard throwing it out the window, out the train window as he was traveling. The one that Lynn Camp and a lot of the early people with EEM told that.
Right.
But yeah, those stories just, and they never cease to amaze me. I don't know why I'm amazed, because it's God. You know, I should never be shocked, but I find myself with my mouth open, and I know God's like, Dirk, close your mouth. Why are you amazed at this? I'm God. You know, this isn't about you. This isn't about, you know, you handing these Bibles out. It's me. It's my spirit. I'm going to work. I'm going to work in the hearts that receive it. Great stories, man. I just think, you know, we talked about this a little bit ago, from the early days to now. I mean, do a little compare and contrast, I guess, in just the magnitude of what we're doing now. I mean, you mentioned it's, you know, what you did before is less than 5% of what we're doing now. What is the work like now compared to then? And what does it take to get out? I mean, last year, distribution of 1.966 million books compared to, you know, whatever that would have been back in the 80s. What does that look like?
Back in the 80s, we were physically producing the books. So it was, you know, we had our own printing machines. We had our own bookbinding machines. We had the forklift. We packed the packages. And you know, it was a start to finish process. Now we're on the front end, very, very involved with getting the files ready to print, with getting the layout and the typesetting done. But when it comes to the actual printing and the bookbinding, it's total hands off. The biggest change with that is obviously the speed of production is, you know, in comparison to us having a small 2-color press, we're printing with people that put it on 5 machines and run 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. And so it's, you know, they put it out high volume very quickly. The quality is 3 or 4 times what we used to be able to do ourselves.
Well, let me back up too. For some of our listening audience, I think they need to understand. So in the 80s, we actually had a printing press. I mean, it was ours, and we were printing. Whereas now, as I tell people, I use the terminology, we believe in creating economy, and we're printing in the nations, or at least in the regions where we're distributing, as close as we can get to hold down on distribution costs and just quantity. So yeah, so go on with that. I mean, the difference in that process.
I think the bottom line, the comparison. Let's look at if you look at the children's Bibles, if we get them really cheap, and that was maybe 2 years ago, now we're not getting them quite as cheap. We were getting them around €1 a piece for just, that's not our real cost, but that's what we were paying the printer. Okay.
Right.
Well, in the past, that would probably have cost us, in reality, if I look at salaries that we were paying the printing staff and the bookbinding staff, we were probably looking at €10 a copy.
Yeah.
And so
wow.
There's a huge difference there, just
Yep.
the economies of being able to just order it. And, the minute they're done producing, we're not paying anybody's labor.
Mhm.
We're not paying for any machine repairs. And
Yep.
that was I was actually without a job when we sold the machines, and some people were going, "Do you think there's still a place at EEM for you?" And this was the second time that had happened, because I was out of a job when the Iron Curtain fell down, because before that I was in charge of smuggling, and there was no smuggling anymore. And so it was like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, what about if I learn to print? So, okay, the job continued. And then the second time around, when we sold all the machines and I was in charge of the printing, it was like, so Scott, you're going to go look for a job or what? And I'm like, well, I'm not sure quite how this is going to work out, but I still think it's good for EEM. And then somebody decided it would be okay if I just switched to the computer. And so been there ever since.
And done a great job, I'm telling you.
Mhm.
Some of the work and the technical side of it. I mean, mention briefly this program that you figured out a different application for, and what it has meant in publishing and really editing time and all the layout process.
You're talking about our use of Paratext in the last few years.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Paratext is the translation software that all the Bible translators worldwide use. And so anytime you get rights to a Bible or asked to be able to use a Bible, it's like 99% of all the Bible societies, they all have the text on Paratext and available. So everybody's using the same format. Well, at first I thought, this is a no-brainer. This is nothing for us. We don't translate Bibles. We've always said we're not in the translation of Bible business. So why do I need to learn this? But Bart wanted me to go to the seminar, so I did. And I learned that they had what was called the Bible module, where it had been made, if you wanted to do a tract, that you would have your commentary in the tract, and then instead of copying and pasting the Bible verse, you could use this software to just say reference Matthew 5:4-20, and it would just pull in the text from Paratext, with the advantage that you could pull it in from any Bible that you had the rights to. So you only had to set it up one time, and theoretically you could pull it in 20 languages. You'd have to still go back in and do the commentary in 20 languages. Well, so I saw the possibility of using that for the chronological Bible. And with F. LaGard Smith's chronological Bible, we spent around 6 months. The first time we did the Russian one, we spent like 6 months, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, check what you pasted. Is it right? And of course, it was never always right. And LaGard took in the worst case scenario, one verse is split up into 3 parts and is in different parts of his Bible. And so it wasn't just a matter of copying a verse. It was a matter of, am I getting the right portion of the verse? And I'm doing this in a language I don't read. And so it was a huge challenge. But with the Bible module, the trick that we came up with, and I don't know, I can only say, I guess it was the Lord that gave me the thought of, how about this? So what the trick that we used was the commentary portion we actually made like a book of the Bible. And so in Matthew, you have the chapters in Paratext, and then in each chapter you have each verse. And so we took all of the commentary section, which is like 20% of the whole Bible. It's a lot of commentary, huge number of pages. And we took all that and made every single paragraph, every single line. If it was a one-line paragraph, then it was a one-line or a one-word paragraph, didn't matter. Each paragraph became a chapter and a verse. So then we had basically the ability to say, okay, reference commentary, chapter 1, verse 2, commentary, chapter 1, verse 10, commentary, chapter 2, verse 3. And what we ended up with is that now, if we want to do the chronological Bible in another language, the only thing we have to do is have the commentary text translated, but it's already numbered as far as which chapter, which verse, and the software just pieces it together. And literally, what used to take 6 months of copying and pasting is now done in 5 minutes. And it just blows your mind.
That.
You sit there and watch it, you go, I can't believe this happened. And then the people at Biblica worked with me, and we upped the, when you say they upped the ante, I'm not sure what the word is there.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah.
And so now not only can we pull everything together, but as we're pulling it together, it's pre-formatted. So all the layout work is pretty much done. Wow. And then the only thing we have to go in is just take in, we would say, remove the widows and orphans, where you budge the line at the bottom or the top to squeeze something in so that the lines look optically nice, but the layout's pretty much done. And we've done that now with the Serbian chronological Bible. We've done it with the Romanian chronological Bible. And now we're branching out and using it for other projects. So we're also using it anytime we do a new language of the Teen Bible. We use the same system. Matter of fact, the people from the Turkish Bible Society, when they saw how quick we put together the Teen Bible, they were kind of like, oh, that's really short.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that story, in that that's how God works, and how he uses us when we walk through doors. Like, you headed off to this conference having no idea, why am I going to this conference? Okay, Bart, you told me to do this, so I'll do it. And God reveals something that really Bart had no idea. Bart didn't know that it was going to do that. And look at what it's done in our time saving, which is money, because we can get things out so much faster now. Sorry, I just had to, that's a story I just love. To me, it's so God in this work, and using you and your abilities and just your humble nature too, to say, okay, I'm going to dive into this and figure out what it is, and if there's an application for us. And lo and behold.
Well, and the irony is that the team of software developers that is working on Paratext, they never designed it to do this.
Yeah.
And so they're following our projects, watching them, and they've actually made some changes in the Bible module to help us out.
That's great.
And other organizations are very excited about using it for similar uses. So I think it's not only that we were able to use it, but the kingdom of God is getting more mileage out of it than we planned.
Yeah.
And there's one other thing, since we're talking about God's amazement here. As I look back on what happened at EEM, it was often that the technological jump, or the learning new ways of doing things or whatever, that usually actually preceded the need. And it wasn't like you hit a wall and you try to figure out, how do we go through the wall? It was more like you happened to break through a wall you didn't really know that was there, and then all of a sudden God opens up, says, well, now that you're here, we could do this and this and this and this. And it's how it's kind of seemed to work out. And so it's like, do you sit around thinking about these? No, not at all. It's just God opens doors. And it's like, okay.
Man, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's
amazing.
Absolutely. So, Scott, can you kind of going off of that, can you tell us maybe a project that you're looking forward to most this year?
I mentioned already the chronological Bibles because both of those are going to be completed this year. Um, Another one that we're doing, which actually Will's doing that, my partner, coworker, but a Georgian children's Bible. And that one is fascinating to me just because the language, when we look at it, it's like, it looks like a bunch of threes laying down, upside down, flipped over. The whole alphabet's just crazy looking to me. I'm sure if I was Georgian, it would be normal, but it just looks crazy to me. It's like looking at Farsi or Arabic almost. And we're doing the children's Bible in that. We actually typeset the whole Bible last year in that language. That turned out to be a big challenge, but it was done.
wow.
And the other amazing thing about that one is that we needed to be able to hyphenate the Georgian language. And as you think about how do you come up with hyphenation rules for the Georgian language and all this? And so we were talking about it and trying to get through it, and we weren't making much progress. And then we decided, okay, we can produce a word list of all the words in the whole Bible and have somebody spend a month or two basically going through each word. They would just have one of each word in the Bible, but that's still a lot of words. And then they would give us all the possible hyphenations for this particular word. And so we had thought about doing that, and we were negotiating with one guy to, what would it cost? And the problem was he wasn't interested in investing the 2 months to do it. And he goes, well, I did some computer research and I found that some guy came up with these hyphenation rules. Can you use this? And so he sent me something I'd never seen, and we did a little bit more research and like, well, I think we actually can use that. And we plugged it in with InDesign, loaded it up to the special place. We'd never done any of that. And all of a sudden it's hyphenating. And we're like, oh, wow, this is really cool. Now, the fun part was it ruined all of our other hyphenation. So we're like, we couldn't hyphenate in English and in all these other languages. And so we had to figure out how to get the machine repaired afterwards. And to be honest, as of today, I'm still working with Adobe trying to solve this problem. They wrote me just a week or so ago and they said, that hyphenation problem you discussed with us a year ago, we've made lots of changes in the program. We think we have it fixed now. And I'm like, no, not according to what I've done. And so, no, you're wrong. Redo your InDesign. And so I did that this morning. It's like, sorry, guys, it doesn't work. But at least it was possible to use it for the Georgian Bible, even though it's a kind of a workaround thing that we ended up doing. So the one other thing would be the Hungarian Bible. We have been printing with one of the Bible societies, and we were at a conference last summer and met someone from another Bible society. And I was saying, I kind of really would like to be able to do other translations in Hungarian and not just rely on this one. And he goes, well, we have a nice translation. It's very well received. And I was like, oh, really? And so we started talking. And when it came time this year, they gave us by far the best deal. And so, but then they said, well, you'll have to typeset it yourself. And if they had told us that 2 years ago, we would have said that's a no-go. We can't do that. We don't have the technology to do it, because we would worry about what if we drop some words or lose a sentence or we'd never know. We'd never know if we accidentally knocked out a word. But now we actually do have the technology to check it afterwards, and so we can say this is what we started with, this is what we ended with. Is it the same? So now it's like, no, Will, that's okay. Thank you. We'll be happy to do the typeset. And it shouldn't be, I don't know, it'll be 3 or 4 weeks of work, but that's about it.
As you're talking, Scott, when we're telling stories or hearing testimonies, from our work overseas, it's evident that God is in the details. And I love how specifically we get to hear from you how much God is in the details, not just for you and your work, but for the kingdom. And this is so much more behind the scenes.
Mhm.
And I love that our audience gets to get a glimpse of how much God cares about translation and typesets and all these different things that we don't think about every day, and
Right.
how God has used you specifically with your skill set and your work ethic to
Yeah.
drive and move these projects forward, and to
Mhm.
like, you are always the one who catches like the creators of the programs issues in their programs. And I love that we have several
Yeah.
stories like that from you, because that's just the gift set that God has given you, and
Yeah.
how it's amazing to see how you've contributed to that work in that way.
Yeah, but you know, a
Mm.
lot of it is God connecting us with the right people.
Mhm.
Oh,
Because,
absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
always, he said that triggered that triggered that, and that triggered the next step, you know.
Mhm.
I'll give you one example of that. We, actually at the conference where I learned about Paratext, the same conference, I met a guy from the British Bible Society, and he had been invited because he was an expert in Paratext. And he was a very interesting guy. We ended up doing some hiking together, but a few months later, we needed, well, we were having trouble purchasing Albanian Bibles. The society that we had been purchasing them from, they just like went dead on communication. And it was during Corona times as well. And we would finally make touch with them and like, I'll get back with you next week. And months would go by. And we after a year of waiting, we gave up. And it was like, what do? We don't know of any other translation. And I called Studge, the guy's name from the British Bible Society, because he just knows everybody. And I'm like, hey, we got this problem with the Albanian Bible Society. Can you like kick them or anything? You know, is there something you can do to just prod them to do something? They're just not moving. And he goes, oh, why do you want to mess with that old translation? There's a brand new translation from another Bible Society that's just done. And it's like, oh, okay. So he said, I'll set up the meeting for you. So we set up a Zoom call, and I think it was Studge and Bart and myself and Altin, the guy's name. Well, you've heard the story, I think, actually, but not everybody. And so Altin's on the call, and he goes, he was the head of the Bible Society. He was in charge of the Bible translation project, and they've been working on this for like 15 years. And he goes, you know, I got my first Bible, my first New Testament, or the first time I got the Word of God, was actually at a refugee camp outside of Vienna. And I'm like, okay, about when was that? You know, and it's like 88 or something like this. And I'm like, okay, I was there at the time. I guess, was that a red New Testament? And he goes, yeah, from Stephen Etches, yes. So it was the New Testament that EEM had printed, that EEM had taken to the people that were working at the refugee center, that was given to him. Okay, and he was just an Albanian refugee. And how often would you think, if you were the person handing a Bible to an Albanian refugee, how often would you think one day this guy is going to translate the Bible? You know?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. See, I love that story. I'm so glad you told that story, because that one,
Mhm.
I mean, that epitomizes how God works through this mission and ministry of his that we call EEM. I mean, it's so not about us. And that, you know, a lot of the stories you've told are just, it's God. This is God's rescue mission. He's going to get it done. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need us. But man, how fun it is when we open ourselves up like you have, Scott, and dive into it for 38 years, and how your faith has increased, and how you sharing the stories increases our faith. And I guarantee our listeners' faith to realize we don't serve a God who can do more than we can ask or imagine. He is. He's doing it right now, way more than we could ever ask or imagine.
Right.
Great times, great stories like that are so encouraging, but there are challenges. I mean, there are days when you think, oh man, it's just not coming together. And I find myself, the very book that we are blessed to provide to people, I find myself in certain parts of it at different times, dwelling. Are there Bible stories, verses, anything that you regularly go to when you're tired and you're like, man, I got to persevere. I gotta keep going.
The first year I was in Vienna, the church was meeting at EEM's facility where the print shop was. And so I was around EEM that first year, and I actually did a hands-on, kind of helped out in the print shop for like 1 week. Okay. So I just knew a bit about it. And that 1 week in the print shop, it was, like assembly line type work where you take the book in your left hand and you put it over there, and you take the book in your left hand and you put it over there. And I went home shaking my head, and I thought, how in the world can these people do that job 8 hours a day? I don't get it. And it just, it was nothing I'd ever seen in Oklahoma as far as, just that type of just assembly line type work, and just monotonous, And so I went home and came back, and where I ended up was in the same shop, sometimes doing the exact same work. And the big lesson that I learned, there's a saying, and I don't know if it's an English saying or a German saying, to be honest, but the question is, how do you eat an elephant?
Mm.
And the answer is one bite at a time. And I must say that didn't become my life motto, but it was very necessary, because there's a lot of monotonous and day-to-day in between the wows, And I remember in the middle of the print shop days, we were always looking for, what can we do to make this Bible or New Testament hold up as long as possible? Well, and what the guys actually decided was, if it was a New Testament, what if we actually put a staple through the back of the book? So it's not only glued, but it's stapled. Well, what that meant was, if you opened it up, it became a little bit difficult to read, because it was really tight, as far as you didn't have a nice margin. Mm. But it also meant this thing is going to hold up for 20 years. It's not going to break apart. So we had decided for these 50,000 New Testaments, we were going to use this method. And I was reasonably new in the print shop. I was not running the place at the time. And I got assigned the task of putting the staples in the book. And so I've got these 50,000 unbound New Testaments sitting beside me, pallet after pallet after pallet. And my job is, I sit at this machine and I count 12 signatures, and make sure I got 12, not 13, not 11. I get my 12 that make up the book from Matthew to Revelation. I take it, I stack it a couple times, I slip it into the machine, and I push it with my fingers on two ends to make sure it's squared up. And then I hit the foot pedal and it comes down and goes ka-choom. And I take it and stack it over here. And so I worked for about an hour. And I thought, okay, it's not going to get much faster than this. This is just going to be what it's going to be. And so then I calculated, how many did I do this hour? And how many books do I have to do? And I figured out I'm going to be doing this for the next 4 weeks, 8 hours a day. and it was, but having spent years doing that, now when we have a big project, even if it's now typesetting or whatever it is, it's like, this is no big deal. You just work each day, and in the end, it'll take place. The big thing is the technology changes do speed things up once in a while. And so that's when we grin from ear to ear and like, oh, this doesn't have to be 4 weeks. That's nice. So now let me get back to the Bible question you asked me as far as the stories, I wouldn't say they're necessarily the ones I would always go to, but I really appreciate the story of Daniel.
Mm.
What I like about him is he was very conscientious about the work. And that's really pushed hard in our office. We have the Basecamp software that we use, and you've got 100 tasks on every project, and you've got 100 projects, but it's pushed very hard. Nobody checks off a task unless it was really done, and there's a conscientiousness about that you say, okay, I can't cut corners. I would like to cut corners. I think it would be fine to cut the corner, but I'm not going to cut the corner, and if it has to go out for another review, then I'm going to have to find somebody to do that review. And if it takes another week before it can go to the printer, then it takes another week. So I would say we really tried to have that conscientiousness that Daniel had, and it said in the end, when they tried to find something wrong with his work, they couldn't attack him on the quality of his work anyway.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would say, not just I have, but pretty much the staff in Vienna. Joseph is an inspiration to me, just because, he did well no matter what the circumstances were. And I don't think he was necessarily excited about his circumstances, but he just went on and said, may God be praised. My favorite book, it's kind of what you asked, I guess. My favorite book is actually Job. I feel like I've not been there, and I'm very thankful that I have not been through his thing. But there's an amount of, I guess, not fearing having to go through the Job experience, because it's like, well, if that's what God decides needs to happen, then so be it. If it's not what God decides to happen, then that's fine. I can say so be it there as well. But I find it very inspirational that even though God put him through all the misery that he did, in the end, God's like, okay, I would really prefer repaying and setting things back with you. And, he ends up with the 3 prettiest girls in the country are his daughters. And so that would set high with me. That would be okay if those were my granddaughters, I guess.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you, Job is definitely a source of inspiration. Anything we can be praying for you and for the work and doors that need to be open, and for our listening audience. I know many of our listening audience, and they are prayer warriors. Anything for the publishing team, anything that's on your heart.
I guess the thing I would mention is it's more not so much what we do as a team, but what we do as individuals. So I'll say the discernment to walk with God, and our individual integrity and just commitment to local church, commitment to God. I think it's very important that that we are being what we want others to become, right? And so we're saying we're passing on God's words so that people can bring praise to God with their lives. So, well, then we need to be bringing praise to God with our lives, because we don't want to become our customer in a sense, or have that need. And that is a continual, I think that's a continual challenge that we have as Christians. Is you never reach a level that you cannot fall from, and you never reach a level that God says, I'm done with you. You don't need to mature anymore. And so just the discernment to be where God wants us to be, I guess.
Man, that's a great word to close on right there. I mean, that's a challenge for all of us. Is I love the way you put that, so that we don't become our customers. That's and that is it. It's a daily task. And I know what you're saying. It's for you, it's afternoon. For us, it's morning. And, we get up, I get up every morning and I'm like, God, I can't do this by myself. So the only way I'm doing this is with you. So where are we going? What are we doing? Let's do this thing. And that's it, just to stay reliant on him and in his word. That's why I love what we get to do.
I would add one thing to that is I also my morning time is my time for reading the Bible and studying before I leave for work. And after the whole pandemic time, I tell people, I say, when I read in the mornings, I am 100% sure this is truth. The rest of the day, the things I read, I'm not so sure about, and I have to question. But at least I can start it out with the true truth.
Amen. Amen. Well, Scott, thanks for being with us, man, and thanks for all that you do. And we greatly appreciate you. And I know there's a plethora of people out there that also just appreciate your commitment to this work. I mean, 38 years and your flexibility and how you've continued to learn. And I think you put a great word on it, and that is we're never going to arrive in anything. I mean, in our work, there's never a time when you go, hey, I got this whole publishing thing figured out. There's always something new. But you know what? That comes from God, because that's our journey with God. I'll never have God figured out, which you said, I keep digging and and that's what's fun, is it's like you just keep opening presents, and there's something new and there's something more exciting. So we just keep digging. So, well, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. And audience, thank you for being with us. And as always, we would ask that you give us a rating, give us a review, write a review, subscribe if you've not subscribed yet. That way, when we have a new episode, it'll pop up in your feed. And we, again, thank you for being with us on 5511. Have a great day, whatever time of day you're listening.
You've been listening to the 5511 podcast, hosted by Dirk Smith, Peyton Armstrong, and Brooke Kell. It's edited by David Wilkinson. The 5511 podcast is supported by EEM. EEM publishes, prints, and distributes Bibles and Bible-based materials in 30-plus nations and in 20-plus languages, free to all. To learn more about how you can partner with EEM, go to eem.org. And we'll leave a link for you in the show notes. We'd also love for you to rate, review, and subscribe. And of course, we'd really appreciate you telling your friends about us. So thanks for joining us. We'll be dropping a new episode the first Tuesday of every month.